Welcome to the Cinematic Void Podcast. Cinematic Void is a cult film series that hosts screenings in the Los Angeles area as well as virtually. I'm your host, Jim Branscombe, and joining me as always is...
Hey, it's Nick Vance, Paranoid Futures. You can find Cinematic Void on the World Wide Web at cinematicvoid.com, as well as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and all major podcast platforms. If you want to support The Void, you can consider joining our Patreon.
Today, we are continuing our film programmer series on the Cinematic Void Podcast, where I talk to one of my contemporaries or peers, or however you choose to view the person. I'm making this more awkward than it needs to be, but that's okay, because the person I am talking to today is one of my good friends. He's one of the great programmers in the United States, possibly the world. I don't know. I haven't met two other worldly podcasters. I haven't met too many worldly film programmers, but he is the program director at the Coolidge Theater Foundation. He's also the creator and host of Coolidge After Midnite. Please welcome to The Void, Marky Anastasio, aka Midnite Mark. How you doing, Mark?
Hi, Jim. It's an absolute honor to be here. That was quite an introduction, and I hope that I can live up to it over these next couple hours.
I guess before we get into the nitty gritty, do you remember when you found yourself kind of like getting into film? Was it just something you particularly saw, or was it just like, you know, always like going to movies and just kind of became like a little bit of an obsession?
Yeah, definitely always liked going to the movies. There was a little Lowe's multiplex in my hometown of Bristol, Connecticut, that I would spend a lot of time at, getting dropped off by my folks and hanging out with friends and buying a ticket for one movie and then sneaking into everything else that we weren't allowed to see. I have great memories of that theater. I can remember the layout of it to this day. And it kind of that turned into collecting film. I was a big DVD guy. I won't say VHS. I know a lot of people say they got into it collecting VHS, but it was mostly the DVD era that I was collecting films in. So this is like the late 90s, mid to late 90s. I started getting a hold of as much as I could. It was around high school where I kind of discovered that there was a world outside of just the blockbuster stuff that I was seeing at the Lowe's. There was a high school assembly or something having to do with the history department where a 35 millimeter print of Kurosawa's Seven Samurai was shown in our performance arts space at the local high school, and I was hooked. I was already like an AV nerd, taking all of the video classes. We were editing VHS tapes on the video toaster machine. If anyone remembers that,
I remember that.
Remember the toaster days? So
yeah.
Learning how to cut tapes together on that stuff. And then when I saw Seven Samurai, it makes me sound like a bumpkin, but seeing a black and white film that was in a foreign language that absolutely thrilled me, just let me know that there was, there was a whole world out there that I was not experiencing. So I started traveling to all the places around Connecticut that sold films, on disc, and just started my collection from there. That's where it began, and it branched out in different ways from those beginnings.
I'm gonna say, how fucking insane is it that a high school did they have two projectors? Was it changeover, or were they doing individual reel changes, or was it like a platter?
That I couldn't tell you. I want to see, because I did run up into the booth to see what was going on in there at a study hall period. I was just like, I need to go be near this thing. And I think I remember, regular 20 minute reels.
Wow.
Yeah. I do remember that we were taking breaks. Like we took multiple breaks. So it wasn't like there was one intermission. I think we watched it over the course of a few days.
Okay, so they did it how most high schools do Romeo and Juliet, where they show... See, when I watched Romeo and Juliet in high school, the Olivia Hussey one that is now very controversial again, we watched, I think, over the course of like 3 days, But like Seven
Yeah.
Samurai is just like on film in that way. Like that's just insane because like the first I didn't ever saw Seven Samurai until like when I was in community college and I took history of film, and that was like the first time I was exposed to it. I can't imagine seeing that on 35 because that has to be mind blowing.
Yeah, as a teenager, it was a game changer. You know, I moved out of my parents' place early. I had my own apartment by the time I was 17, 18 years old. And so, and I moved in, you know, with another couple of people my age, and our place immediately turned into like the local hangout. And I had a great TV, I had a great entertainment system and this collection of weird movies. And it kind of, I built up a reputation for being somebody that threw on something insane, you know, and like insane to us in Bristol, Connecticut at the age of 18 is not, you know, what anybody listening right now would think is insane. Like I would put on a DVD of Fulci's Zombie and people would be like, what is happening? You know, like it was mostly, you know, foreign horror that I had collected and would run at parties, and I would introduce the films, and that's where I that's where I first, you know, in my mind, first started presenting films to people was in that apartment on Bradley Street in Bristol, Connecticut.
Did you when you were doing that? Because like you know, when we were younger, the idea of a film programmer or someone presenting films was not really an idea in the ether. Like I think the first time I ever like kind of experienced it when I was like maybe late 90s early 2000s when I was going to like different spots in New Jersey when I was going to exhumed film screenings and I'd see those guys introduce a movie and then show it. Like was it just something you felt natural just doing just on your own? Like, hey, I got this movie. I want to say like, hey, we're about to watch some crazy shit and just maybe kind of set it up sort of and just let it unspool, so to speak, or spin
Yeah.
around in your DVD player.
No, it started that way. I didn't know that that was something that happened. But in my, you know, later on in my, I think in my, I want to say in my early 20s, um, I spent a lot of time like trying to write film reviews, right? Like super snarky, punny, horrible writing that I was trying to get published places like, for the most part, propping up films that I thought were great. And that led me to outlets where such ridiculous film criticism would be published. And on some of those outlets, I started reading about what Lars Nilsson and Zach Carlson were doing at the old draft house um, back in the day, and that really stuck with me when I was reading about these people that were selecting films and introducing them to an audience and hearing about their encyclopedic knowledge of cinema and how they could hold court with the likes of, you know, a Quentin Tarantino or whoever the visiting filmmaker was, and hosting Q&As. I just thought that that was the most amazing line of work that I had ever heard of. Never, ever thinking that I would be able to find my way into such a job. At that time, I was working under the table, and even then, like it was work the type of work that was like under the table's table. And so it just was not, it wasn't anything that I ever thought would be able to happen for me. Eventually, I moved to Boston to finish school, and I'm still working on that part of it, the finishing part. um, yeah, at the you know, in my 40s. But I came up here. I transferred from a community college in Connecticut up to UMass Boston and was taking classes there. And I just applied for jobs at all of the places in Boston that I loved the most. It was, you know, it was a great little bookstore, a great local comic chain, and the Coolidge Corner Theater. I had been traveling up here to watch movies at the Coolidge since the late 90s. 99, well, very late 90s. 99 is when I first came up here. So in 2006, I made the move to Boston, and the Coolidge was the first place that gave me a part-time job. And so I started here working on the box office team and selling tickets and popcorn and sweeping floors. And it was my first weekend here. Our midnight movies on that first weekend that I was employed here were Alejandro Jodorowsky's The Holy Mountain and El Topo. And I've spent the last 5 years as somebody who thought he knew something about cult cinema, and that was my first exposure to Jodorowsky, and I was absolutely blown away by what I was seeing on screen. I think I was sweeping up and said, like, hey, I'm just going to pop in and see what this thing's all about, and walked into the Holy Mountain right about the time that there are a pair of jaguar breasts, like breasts in the shape of jaguar heads, just kind of spewing milk around. And I was just like, wah, chinema, like this is where it's at. I can't believe what I'm seeing. And there's a whole crowd of people here just enjoying it together. And I was sold. Like from then on out, I was bothering the current program manager to just assist in any way, shape, or form that I could.
I am absolutely envious that your first two exposures to two monumental films, Seven Samurai and The Holy Mountain, were in movie theaters, because
Yeah.
I watched Seven Samurai on VHS in History of Film. I saw Holy Mountain on a fucking VHS bootleg in the 90s, because
Yeah.
like it was really hard to see that stuff back then. And then it wasn't until like Anchor Bay finally did those, like the first box set of all that Jodorowsky stuff. So I'm envious that you got to see things that look good right off the bat, where I was like just watching things
The
that
no, the Jodorowsky experience, actually both the Kurosawa and the Jodorowsky were pretty close to like spiritual things for me. And I know that saying it because as I'm remembering and talking about them, I can see all around me, like in those memories, they're like firmly in my brain, and I can see what I was doing and who was around, and I can remember what the rooms felt like. So they're very much ingrained in what's going on up here.
So, how did you work your way up to be able to actually become a programmer of sorts? Because,
Yeah.
in this modern day and age, and I've talked about this with everyone that's been on this series so far, it's like, a lot of people think they can just like walk in, turn in a resume, and I'm a film programmer, where like everyone else like came up in a way, like in usually a very indirect way. But you, kind of similar to what I did, is like I started working at a movie theater, or like a nonprofit movie theater, just to be clear, and kind of like work the odd jobs and just kind of ended up where we're at now. So could you talk about how you had to convince someone to like, hey, let me pick movies?
So I remember vividly the first bit of programming I got to do. It was for our Halloween horror marathon. The programmer and the box office team had always put the show on sort of in tandem, working together. And that particular year, they were at odds, and it might or it wasn't going to happen. And I raised a fuss, with the program manager at the time, and he kind of threw his hands up and tossed me printed paper lists of all of the collectors that we borrowed film prints from. So he threw me, Harry's list. He threw me another list from a collector. I shouldn't be naming the collectors, perhaps, but it was like 3 packages of paper that had everybody's film prints on them, and he was like, you pick between 6 and 7 films from those lists. You need to write a press release. You need to come up with some fun copy for the show. You need to commission a poster, and if you can get all that done, we'll get it booked and we'll get it on sale. And so that's what I did for our Halloween marathon in 2007. And what I did is not what I do now, but at the time, what I did was I just played the hits. I put together a 12-hour horror program that was An American Werewolf in London, Halloween, Evil Dead 2, The Exorcist. Like, it was just an embarrassment of headliner riches, and there weren't any real, there were no B titles, there were no more obscure films or fan favorites, or there was no variations on a theme, which is what I mostly do now. So I played the hits, and it was moderately successful. And from there, I was able to become the assistant to the program manager. And this was also while I was taking every other odd job that came available here at the Coolidge. I became a box office manager. I was our lighting and audio tech for live performances. I was even training as a projectionist for some time. So I was just the person that was willing to do whatever the organization needed when they needed it. And that's usually my advice to anybody who says, like, I want to become a film programmer. Like, I do hear from folks who, go to Emerson or any other of the local colleges that offer courses in film and film programming. And folks will come to me and ask for meetings, and I'm happy to meet with them. And I can remember a few of them that have all ended this way, where they ask for my advice, and I let them know that they should find the art house that is in their area, find the theater, or it doesn't even have to be an art house, it could be a for-profit. Find the theater in your area that you love and is doing programming that you respond to. Get a job there, make yourself indispensable to them, and just work your way into a place where you might one day pick a movie. And most of them are not satisfied to hear that. And in one case, I received a response from someone who just stared at me blankly after and said, "But I have a degree." And I was like, "Yeah, everyone on our box office floor right now has a degree. Like, there's lots of folks with degrees and they're all doing the same thing. They're finding the place that they love, and they're working hard for them, and some of them stick it out long enough to. Now, can they apply for a film programmer job and get it? Maybe that's another route, but it doesn't teach you the ins and outs of. You have to learn everything about the place. You have to know what goes into every aspect of the theatrical experience, and that experience, in my mind, starts at the parking lot of wherever you're working. You got to know the audience members' experience from the moment they step through the door to when they sit in the seats to when they watch the film you've selected for them to them leaving. And the best way to do that is to just kind of work at a movie theater.
I agree with that because, like, I was never even thinking about doing this when I ended up started doing it. It just kind of came together. But, like, you know, I think just working at a movie theater, especially just any kind of movie theater, maybe not a multiplex. I know that that's probably not the way to get to be a film programmer is working at your local Regal, obviously. But, like,
That's true.
working at an art house or, a smaller theater chain that might do some repertory. I think just understanding the business, because, like, as much as people think picking a movie is all it takes to be a film programmer, there's a lot more that goes into it, and you kind of hit on the head, which is why I agree very much philosophically with everything you just said. Is just the experience isn't just the movie, it's from before they step through the door and then after they leave and go home, and how they, the whole experience all the way through, because it's just the movie's the main course, but there's a lot of appetizers and dessert before and after.
Yes, and I want to add, I should add that film festivals is also part of my suggestion to people that ask. You find the local art house theater or your local film festival that's playing the type of stuff that you think is really aces, and volunteer for them. Meet people at that festival. Go back the next year, volunteer again. You hear that they need a position that you have a skill set for, apply for it. Just do some film work.
I think that's really, really great advice. However, I will say somehow you've done like big league shit all the way through, like seeing Seven Samurai on 35 in high school, seeing Holy Mountain for the first time in film, programming a fucking 12-hour movie marathon as your first
That's
real.
my first gig. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I'm just going to say and let everyone know that's not typical. It's
No,
very
it's
atypical.
not. So the more typical, my first singular film programming was I programmed a midnight. I started programming our midnight movies, and the first film I put on screen at midnight was the original Planet of the Apes, the Charlton Heston Planet of the Apes, and I was like, this is what I'm doing as a midnight movie. And I remember stepping on that stage and hosting. It was in Movie House 2, a house here that you're familiar with.
Hmm.
uh, I stepped onto that stage and was looking at four people. And I told myself, I have a lot to learn about what people are looking for in this time slot.
I think that's really, really great advice. However, I will say somehow you've done like big league shit all the way through, like seeing Seven Samurai on 35 in high school, seeing Holy Mountain for the first time in film, programming a fucking 12-hour movie marathon as your
That's
first
my
real.
that's my first gig. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I'm just going to say and let everyone know that's not typical. It's
No,
very
it's
atypical.
not. So the more typical, my first singular film programming was I programmed a midnight. I started programming our midnight movies, and the first film I put on screen at midnight was the original Planet of the Apes, the Charlton Heston Planet of the Apes, and I was like, this is what I'm doing as a midnight movie. And I remember stepping on that stage and hosting. It was in Movie House 2, a house here that you're familiar with.
Hmm.
uh, I stepped onto that stage and was looking at four people. And I told myself, I have a lot to learn about what people are looking for in this time slot. Um, I went through lots of weird, you can't always just play the heavy hitters. You can't always bank on a classic film making. I mean, that's obvious, and it wasn't
Yeah.
obvious to me at the time. Um, and I remember. Let's think about other stuff that failed. I remember I would do a thing where if the remake of The Last House on the Left was hitting theaters that Friday, I would have Wes Craven's original on screen. This is one that I did on Friday and Saturday night, to try to hopefully trick people into buying tickets to watch the original movie. And that happened at Last House on the Left. And as I came out to introduce it, I was looking at about 40 people, and I explained what they were there to see, or just clarified, like, hey, I just want to make sure everyone here is aware that they are here for Wes Craven's original. And as I was doing that, like a row of 8 people stood up, shaking their heads, pulling their tickets out of their pocket, and they went downstairs for a refund. Um, so that was also not a great plan for midnight programming, but that's just one of the many misses that I had, working this gig.
The one thing I wanted to ask now, obviously the Coolidge had midnight movies before your time. Were you the
Yeah.
one who got basically kind of branded it Coolidge After Midnight and then kind of made it like its own series, like a series, so to speak? Like a lot of theaters do midnight movies, but like I feel like
Yeah,
once I think with Coolidge After Midnight, it becomes its own brand. Could you talk about how you kind of work towards that?
sure. Coolidge After Midnight as the title of the series is actually something that I pushed back against when it was suggested. Um, so the Coolidge has always had a history of midnight movies playing here, all the way back, to the actually early '70s. At my desk, I have the theatrical release poster for El Topo above where I sit, and it is the one that is from our archives from when it played here at midnight in 71 or whenever it was. I believe it was 1971. And it's like totally torn to shreds and faded. And I think there's what looks to be blood streaking across it. And I love it as a commemoration of the fact that Midnight movies have always lived here. So the Midnight program was always robust. People knew the Coolidge as the place where something weird and wonderful was happening at midnight on Friday and Saturday. Under my watch, it kind of steered away from, at the time where I took over, it was a mixture of live action, either some sort of reading or adult sort of performance. There were lots of burlesque shows taking place. There's nothing wrong with burlesque shows. We were hosting a lot of those draft house action pack shows where, you know, Henry Mazza comes out dressed as Prince or some shit and entertains to the delight of hundreds of people. There was lots of that happening, and it was always my desire to steer it more toward film, and not just film, but 35 millimeter, you know, original film elements at midnight on screen. I knew that there was more of an appetite for just the basics, you know, just the facts. True cult cinema from 35 millimeter prints on Friday and Saturday nights. And there were a lot of arguments where I kind of steered it back to that, going from not just one movie each weekend to a different film screening on Friday than on Saturday, taking us from what was like 2 films per month to, you know, 8 movies rolling on screen, or 8 to 10 movies in a given month. And we slowly but surely built up a really great following. And our problem here, because we're a first run theater, there are certain times a year, like, you know, like right about now, or in the fall mostly, where you've got the tent pole sort of Academy Award contenders coming out, and they're all 2 hours and 45 minutes long. And none of our, this is, sorry, I'm speaking now to the genesis of the name of the series. None of these films are short enough to actually end before midnight if you're starting a film in like a 9 o'clock round or set. Do you guys say rounds or sets for your show times?
You know what? We don't do either of them
You
because
don't
it's
say
free.
either. What do you
Yeah.
call them?
I think we just call it Showtime. Man, I don't know.
Yeah, you don't
Man,
have
it.
you
Yeah,
don't
we.
have a term for the block of shows playing in one given hour.
No, and I think it,
Okay?
I think well, I'm going to tell you why, because it wasn't until we did the Lost Fearless 3 that, well, actually, like, because
You
we
have
only we
multiple things.
yeah, well, actually, I take that back. When the Egyptian used to have the smaller Spielberg theater, we would have a second screen. But like really, like at the time until maybe recently, or to the Egyptian reopening, it was always like maybe there was a matinee, and then there was maybe evening show that was a double feature or triple feature.
Okay.
So we don't actually like, you know, it's there's set. Actually, I think set times. Now that I just said it, it's probably set times, but like it's definitely ebb and flow, because, you know, if you have guests and things like that, that throws everything fucking off.
Yeah. Yeah. We were never able to. We would run into times where the midnight movies were starting, or we would just start seating for them at midnight, or, you know, at 12:05, and then the film wasn't starting until 12:15, and our box office team was really feeling that pressure. They had an anxiety around, like, I think we're upsetting these people because it says 11:59 p.m. on their ticket. And for, like, you know, this is really inside stuff, but for reporting purposes, if you're running a midnight movie on Friday, it's got to be reported as part of Friday night's grosses. So the ticket has to be 11:59 p.m., whether it's starting at that time or at 12:15 a.m. So the suggestion was made, like, we need to change this to Coolidge After Midnite to let people know that the program would not be starting uh, at midnight. And I hated it for a long time, but was like, all right, fine, we'll do it. So it was a logistical decision to sort of try to accommodate anyone who might be upset about waiting an extra 5 to 10 minutes for the midnight movie. And then it's just sort of stuck. Our logo is designed by a really great illustrator named Mark Roosh, Mr. Roosh. Mark had Mr. Roosh had been a part of the Halloween and the Coolidge and the Halloween marathon since he designed the first poster for that show over 20 years ago now. And he's gone on to design just about every shirt and series poster that we've put on. And it's a great partnership. I really feel like his artwork is really part of the film program in a way that I absolutely love as like a comic book kid, like programmer and artists working together, like writer and artist for comics. It creates a really great feel for the series on the whole.
Now, I'm gonna, obviously we're talking about film programming, but because of
Yes.
the way, Coolidge After Midnight is like a sub series or a series, and I talked about a little bit. I talked a little bit about this when I had Teresa, who does Screen Scream. She has very specific branding and art because she has her artist Finney, who does like her stuff. And the
Yep.
thing I've noticed is that the kind of more memorable programming series that are out across the country kind of build a visual presence with that. And I know
Yes.
you were just talking about how important it was, but like, could you, I just want to kind of like hit on like how important, and especially in the day of age of social media, that branding is with like trying
Yeah.
to promote screenings. Because I hate to say it, but like, and you could probably test this, it's not just the movie that's going to put asses in seats, so to speak. Sometimes it's like the brand that will, and you kind of need both.
Definitely. So we figured out pretty quickly that with the frequency that we were doing midnight movies here, that the promotion for them could not live on the general at the Coolidge social media accounts. Where we have 4 other screens, about to be 6 other screens here, and so many different programs and films each week that need attention, and the midnights were kind of swallowing up the space. And also the people that follow those more straightforward accounts, don't want to see the type of weird stuff that we're posting in promotion of these films for the most part. So we created our own Coolidge After Midnight handles for Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and do dedicated promotion for the series on those handles. And that helped to further it as a brand, I think, kind of. I don't even know that we were thinking of it quite so much as its own brand until we broke off those social media accounts and started promoting things that way. Um, it kind of took off from there. I mean, we don't have a ton of followers. Like I think we're just at about 5,000 on our After Midnight Instagram. Pretty good following, but the Coolidge itself has a pretty monstrous social media following as far as art house theaters are concerned. So we do get help from the general accounts from time to time, but it is important for it to feel like its own thing. And I think we've done a good job of cultivating that for people. Like it definitely has its own vibe. It is in the programming reflects that. Like these are not films for the most part that would ever run at prime time here at the theater. For the most part, 80% of the stuff that plays at midnight truly belongs at midnight. Gone are the days of Planet of the Apes playing at midnight on our screens, and it's you know he says with a whole month of video game midnights coming up that could probably easily play at 7 o'clock at any other theater in the country.
I'm gonna just ask this because we're already talking about times and stuff, and I know the Coolidge is in the kind of almost finished with their expansion. Could you talk about that? How that expansion is going to kind of open up, not just only the Coolidge with more screens, but how it could help more of like the genre focused programming that you're kind of spearheaded there.
That's a great question. We are days away from opening what is now a $13 million expansion of the theater. It's a brand new lobby space, a new entry point to the theater, new concession stand and bar, ticketing counters, 2 new theaters, a 150 seat space and another 50 seat theater. and then a community education and engagement center that can seat 60 up to 60 people in a classroom setting, and it also doubles as like an event space that can, has a catering kitchen. And we're just so excited for all of the different types of films and programs that will now be able to host. We say no to so many films throughout the year due to space issues. You get locked in with distributors for what can leave your space, even if you think something's ready to leave. Sometimes you can't drop it in order to bring something else in time. So hopefully it cuts down significantly on the number of first run features that we're declining to run here, and allows us to play, more mission focused stuff. There's a lot of smaller films that are wonderful that just sometimes there's not enough room here at the inn for them, and we hope that changes with the addition of this new space. As far as genre stuff, I really, nobody else here knows this. So if my bosses listen to this podcast, which they won't, I would like to start shifting some of the genre programming to the 10 o'clock round. I think that we can start experimenting with that relatively soon. I think we'll always have a midnight film program here. The Coolidge After Midnite will truly stay an after midnight program, but you might see the beginnings of some other cult classic program that might infiltrate our 10 o'clock era of space here at the theater. I'm not trying to sell out to the man, right? But I am in my 40s, and it might be fun. It might be fun to host stuff at 10 o'clock at night on Fridays and Saturdays rather than midnight. Truly, actually, strike that part. I shouldn't even say that. I'm just kidding. You can leave it.
Well, as someone who, like, when I got a 7 o'clock time slot as opposed to a 10 o'clock in Los Angeles, it's like, man, this is great. I still have my
Yeah,
whole
no,
night.
that is awesome, and it leads to better attendance. Like you're 7 o'clock's wonderful. Boston, I am asked at this time of year, I'm asking people to leave their homes when it is 20 degrees outside to like trek to a movie theater, and when they get out of that movie, it's going to be 12 degrees outside, and that's a tough sell for anybody. So I got to make sure the programming's real good.
Kind of more back on programming. You mentioned earlier just like, the dangers of playing the hits, being safe and vanilla. And I'm going to guess maybe when you were first starting it, you were just going to be like, hey, why aren't we playing this stuff? But like, as you were getting deeper in programming and kind of learning that, obviously there's staples, but, when you get through a first year of programming and you play all the hits, did you like have a oh shit moment, like what the fuck do I play now kind of thing?
Absolutely. You definitely, I can remember a moment of like, well, where does that leave me? And then you kind of have to go back to the drawing board, and it needs to be a mixture. So some programmers make the mistake that I made, which was playing all the bigger films first. Other programmers go in another direction, which is sometimes, it depends on where you are. It can be a mistake, or maybe it works. But when a programmer is just programming a series that is entirely to their own tastes, I think that also runs the risk of kind of falling flat, especially if you're just trying to start up a film series. And I try to warn people against this when newer programmers call me up for advice and they say, hey, I'm just getting started. What do you think of this upcoming series? And it's like a list of titles that that I know that if I play it here, it's just like a half a dozen people are going to come to all this stuff, and if I've got to Google what one of them is, there's a risk that you just kind of you got to build something. You got to build up an audience. So for every one of those that's for you got to have some stuff that's for your crowd. So you have to know your audience is a huge part of this. you gotta, and it takes a while. There's a lot of trial and error involved in getting to know your audience. And I think that I've gotten to a point now where I understand what our core crowd wants to see, and sometimes hopefully I'm able to surprise them.
So after you learned that, like, basically you can't lean heavy on the hits, as you program now in the, what year is this, 2024? Yeah, I think it's 2024. I forget. After 2020, it's all a crapshoot on what year it actually is. But as you program now, since you're doing Fridays and Saturdays, and you basically you do two concurring and you correct me if I'm wrong here, but you do two different themes each month, one on the Friday, one on the Saturday, right?
No, sometimes, but usually I try to make it. If I am doing a theme in a particular month, it's usually just I try to stick with it.
Okay.
Um, some of my favorites have been in recent years. I wish I could remember further back. Maybe I can go to the calendar if we're hard up for my memory. Um, I did a true crime midnight series here that was really successful, and I don't, in hindsight, I didn't know it would be as successful, but talking about podcasts, like the what do they call them, the murderinos, the podcast fans are large in numbers, and I remember being incredibly surprised by the response to that particular series that I had done. We were seeing hundreds and hundreds of people at each show, including a near sold out screening of My Friend Dahmer, which I was not ready for. I thought that would just be sort of a 50-person screening, not knowing that the star of that film was, I'm making myself sound like an idiot at this point, but I knew it was good for the program, but I didn't know what type of fan base the star of that movie had. And we had, 400 people at midnight for a relatively new film, which was really cool. But I try to, if we are doing the, variations on a theme sort of thing, I try to have fun with it. I try to, I'm really proud of this. I did this Carnage at the Carnival program a couple summers ago in July, where we not only had that beautiful print of Carnival of Souls, which you recommended to me, which is another big part of programming is, get your network together, talk to your friends, talk to your colleagues. But in that Carnage at the Carnival program, I was really impressed with myself by the fact that the program featured both the live action Scooby-Doo movie and the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Like I just, like any film series, I really felt like I had done my job in putting together a well-rounded program by the fact that those two films were in it. And that series included other things like Santa Sangre, Final Destination 3, Freaks was in there, Killer Clowns from Outer Space, a couple others, but it was that was a lot of fun.
When you're working within a theme, do you try, like, I guess there's a couple ways you can do it. You can be very narrow focused and have everything just be like almost the films, it's like a continuous thing with each film, or you could do like a, spread out the variety where the theme might hit a little bit in this film, but then the next film it hits in a different way. Do you have a preference on how you work it, or is it just really depend series to series?
So I guess I would be the latter. I would lean toward the latter in that it's fine to have a themed month. Your core audience will know that you're putting on a themed month, and they might come back for everything. But you just want to make sure that there's enough variety in the types of films that you're offering that are exploring a theme, to keep people interested weekend after weekend. So I would be more inclined to do to show films that explore the theme in one way this night and then in a different way, and then maybe we get sidetracked and follow this thread for the following weekend. That sort of thing is much more my speed.
Okay. I mean, I'm always curious because, like, for years I would do like double features and triple features for a theme, but now since I do weekly programming and been doing themes and like trying to figure out how do I do a theme that might not be really a theme, but just kind of get away so I can show different kinds of films. And that's just me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, there's no wrong way to do it. And like I said, it depends on what your audience is game for. I do think that I you know I think that you might have an audience that is a little bit more. Oh, I don't even know if I want to go there. That might make me sound like a dickhead. I just mean like a little bit more willing to branch out, but maybe that's maybe that's my own fears and I shouldn't be putting that on my audience. Do you think people in LA are a little bit more willing to seek out something that they've never seen before, or I don't know what I'm trying to get at here.
So I think I know exactly where you're trying to get at. It's like,
You can Cinematic Void can go much deeper than Coolidge After Midnight can, in my opinion, what just for covering costs on what we're booking.
yeah. I mean, and I'll because it'd probably be good to talk about the compare and contrast of styles and what one can get away with and what the other can get away with and what neither of us can actually get away with. The thing I learned and the approach I started taking, and I kind of got off of it last year, where like I started getting into maybe not chasing hits, but like looking to have like at least one thing or two things that would sell out each month, and then just having the one or two for me kind of thing. But then
Yep.
but the danger with that is like I started like hunting to be like, oh, I want to have my numbers up, and that changed what I was doing. And what fundamentally what I've always been more comfortable doing and prefer to do is like, and it comes to, and this was going to be a question I asked you, and sorry I'm rambling here, but like I don't count on having the same audience week to week. I know there might be anywhere from 15 to 30, maybe up to 50 people, depending on what the theme is, and who are regulars who will come out to most of the stuff I show. But
Yes.
there's still another 100 people that I have to like get in there. So
Yep.
what I've started doing is like I'm just expanding on what I consider a cult void or a cinematic void film. And most of the time the American Cinematheque doesn't give me much push back on it, because like I'm just going to use like the current month I'm in and the month I'm doing next. Like for February, I usually do something called Void and Times, which is always like vaguely romantic or something fucked up, romance type of thing. And yeah. I just did Hollywood 90028, a brand new restoration from Grindhouse releasing. And I like Bob Morawski from Grindhouse. And I always like when he's got a new restoration, I try to work it in. But my expectations were, because LA sometimes is we only want to watch shit on 35 millimeter crowd. And there is a print of this, but it looks like absolute fucking garbage. It is just faded to fucking hell at this point. But I thought I would land around 50 to maybe 80 people tops. And I'm not saying that because Bob said he thought there'd be 15 people there, which is hilarious. He's like, hey, man, we got to show this. And it's like, yeah, but there'd be 15 people here. He's like, yeah, I know, but we should show it anyway, which is not wrong in a fundamental sense. On a financial sense, it's not good business. But I was like, you know what? I think I can get like at least my core audience who will like try anything just based on me as a film programmer, tastemaker, and pick up a few other people. We sold it out on a fucking rainy day in LA.
That's awesome.
And it surprised me. And this upcoming Monday, as I'm recording this, I'm doing The Chase with Adam Rifkin, one of my personal favorite 90s movies. And I thought that was a fucking slam dunk. I had Rifkin there for Detroit Rock City last year, and that sold out. And The Chase is probably, it's going to do well, but like I thought it was a slam dunk sellout. And I thought, Hollywood 90028 was like, a little bit of the tougher sell. And I'm also showing a movie called Bloodletting, which is shot on video, which as much as I love it, I knew that wasn't going to do well. But I was like, you know what? Gotta have variety in there.
Yeah.
But I think with me is just like, if I can convert someone new to start coming to screens regularly, I'm not saying every Monday, but maybe pick up a person that comes one or twice a month just to check shit out because I show something like Murmur the Heart or Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, which is part of my March lineup, which is Mom and Son March, which is not a theme I recommend anyone else trying at this point. I I'm just like, what can I do as a fucking theme at this point? Because it's like there's so many themes that you can do, and I was just like, I just want to make it more difficult and just figure out what's the weirdest way I can do a theme, and that's what I came up with.
Yeah.
But my thing is, it's like if I show movies that some might feel are out of the spectrum, but I could actually justify that are within, even if they're on the outskirts. If I can get some people to come check out like Alice or Murder the Heart or even The Shining, and they're like, I like the presentation, I like the vibe of the screen, I'll come check out something else that maybe I'm not as familiar with, or maybe might be a little out of my wheelhouse. And that's my ultimate goal, is to like,
That's great.
just bring new people in, because, and we can talk about it, because Coolidge is kind of in a college town where you're going to cycle through your audience eventually, kind of thing. And
we got like a 4-year turnover thing happening here for most people.
And I guess the question I was going to ask you after I went on that long-winded rant about how I'm fucking insane in what I do is like,
it's a good point about being surprised by some of your bookings. Sometimes, the film that you don't think is going to do well surprises you, and vice versa.
Yeah, and it happens all the time. Like there's very few locks in life. Like Jaws, that's a lock. But if you play Jaws at the wrong time, or too many other theaters in town are playing it against you, Jaws isn't necessarily the lock that it normally is.
Right. I mean, I'm in talking about themed programming. I've only been, most of this conversation I've just been talking about Coolidge After Midnite stuff. But I mean, I'm kind of not forgetting, but not touching upon the fact that, like, as the program director for the Coolidge as the whole, I do put together. We have repertory screening just about every night of the week, and so I am doing themed programming, themed repertory months, aside from the programming for all of our signature programs, like our cinema jukebox music and film series, our rewind 90s and aughts nostalgia series, our big screen classics program. We just announced today that I put together a program called What's the Score in April, where we're going to be showcasing films that have particularly memorable scores, along with the theatrical release of the Morricone documentary Ennio from Music Box Films. And we're also going to do a one-off of Janice's Ryuichi Sakamoto opus. And Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence is part of that lineup, along with films like Rocky and Empire Strikes Back and King Kong. And it's just a fun way to play a month of great films. And will everyone that's coming to them know that they're playing as part of a program that is focusing on the score in particular? Some will, but for the most part, no. And so that's mostly how I put the stuff together. Like, variations on a theme, great, but make sure there's something for everybody in the program. Because one of my main, I don't know if you call it a philosophy, but one of my goals in putting together a calendar of programming here at the Coolidge and in the Boston area is I want this theater, I want this place to have something for everybody. This needs to feel, this is such a fucking expensive city to live in. And places, I understand that places like the Coolidge are a refuge from the bullshit, right? Like, people are coming here for 2 hours of escape. And I want to make sure that in any given week, there is something for everyone that might want that experience. And so that is my overarching goal in putting together all of these different programs that we do from month to month.
I mean, that's an incredible just mission in general. Now, you're the program director. How many people do you have with you on your programming team as of right now?
One. We have a well, that's not necessarily true. So I have input from everyone here at the theater. The Coolidge is a little different from what I've understood of how other organizations work in regard to programming. Our Big Screen Classics signature series, which is a year-round classics, it's just what it sounds like. It is we get together as a full admin team around a table, and I run that meeting, by sharing the lists in the months leading up to it, where people are adding titles that they feel are classics. Other members of the team here are voting on titles by placing their initials next to a title that they think is a must for this year's Big Screen Classic series. And then we sit together for hours, and I take a giant whiteboard with some Post-its, and I moderate a conversation between our teams, sometimes an argument, and we move films around the board until we have a year-long lineup of anywhere from 30 to 50 films. That is more me just kind of, as program director, that's me directing that programming. So none of the people in that meeting are necessarily part of the programming team. They are our financial director, they're our education director, our marketing folks, our development team. Everyone here at the Coolidge is involved in putting together a series that can be up to 50 titles long. And that's the way you would want to put together a 50 film program that's supposed to be a variety pack touching upon so many different areas of interest, right? Like, you want that expertise. And it's a hell of a morning to stand there and sort of guide people toward the decisions that you hope they come to. So that's how we do it. So I get a ton of help from everyone all the time in regard to a lot of our signature programs. Our themed repertory months, it's mostly that's mostly my programming, with help from our programming and outreach coordinator, Billy Thiginis, who has worked with us in one capacity or another part-time for 6 years, has been brought on full-time to help with programming and outreach. So he's a person here that is very helpful to me, as well as our education director. Billy and I, more often than not, brainstorm all different titles for all different reasons. We're constantly bouncing films off of one another, and that has been a pretty big help for me to sort of freshen up what we're doing at the After Midnite series. Like, because I'm 17 years in, so it's about time that I have someone here helping me jog my memory and naming titles that I might not be immediately thinking of. Billy's a great help. So yeah, it depends on what the series is. Our Rewind series is another where I look for the input from our box office team, mostly because they tend to be younger folks, and so we're in the process of voting, having them select their titles and vote for the titles that they would like to see me select for this year's Rewind series, which it runs across 8 months from April till whenever. And we run these nostalgia titles with a social element following. So you play Clueless, and then afterwards we meet at a local restaurant or bar, and we party afterwards, and we have themed cocktails and food that go along with the movie, and everybody kind of hangs out, and it's a place for the 20 and 30 somethings to interact with each other after a screening here. Lots of that stuff. So it's a very collaborative environment, is what I'm saying. But a lot of the monthly repertory, is programming that I put together, bouncing ideas off of Billy and also my deputy director. Just like, hey, what do you think about this? And they might tell me that one of the titles is crazy, or and I'll either accept that criticism and make a swap, or sometimes stick to my guns and say, I really think this is something that's going to work, and then it either does or it doesn't.
I mean, the thing is, there's no guarantees in film programming, but I do like that, like, it's almost like not all of it, but there's some programming by the community and the staff, because I feel like then it kind of invests the people that work there. Not, it's, because there some places there can be a separation of like, this is just box office, this is projection, this, that, where like everyone could potentially have a say and get something in there. Like, wow, I helped pick this movie, and then, get to see it on a screen. I feel like there's an added value, and it makes people just like enjoy the whole experience of working at a movie theater even more.
That's what I'm hoping for. I hope that happens, because we certainly rely on everyone here to get what we do done. The box office team is incredibly valuable. I mean, you shouldn't even have to say it, to making sure customers have that experience that we talked about. Like the minute they set foot through the doors, the experience begins, and our box office team is in charge of that. I hope that they feel as though they're heard and are part of the team. We as an organization have those same troubles that many theaters do, where there sometimes is a disconnect between the administrative teams, the box office teams, and the projection teams. So we're still working on ways to mitigate that sort of thing. Here at the Coolidge, it's called because our offices are literally upstairs. The mentality sometimes is referred to as upstairs versus downstairs, and that's something that we've been trying to move away from. Not move away from. That sounds dismissive. It's something that we're trying to address, and hopefully involve more folks, especially as we're growing. Like it's only going to be more important for the people at the people on our box office team, our front of house team, to feel as though they are a major part, to feel as though they are the major part of this organization, because they really are.
We've been talking about your work within the confines of the Coolidge Theater itself, but I wanted to ask you about some of your offsite events, because there's the Rocky Woods, the Medfield, like former mental hospital that you and I went to and walked around. Just giving a plug to that vlog there, in case you haven't seen it yet. And I think there's a couple other places you've done like offsite,
Yeah,
and you've brought out like 35 millimeter projectors and that kind of stuff. Can you talk about like how that all started?
that's a great question. We do quite a few outdoor shows. Let me try to think back to how it originated. I think the first outdoor stuff that we did was the 35 millimeter show. So the Rose Kennedy Greenway Conservancy, the Greenway here in Boston, is a beautiful park system that runs through downtown. Used to be the old highway system, but then the Big Dig buried the highway underground, and where the highway was is now gorgeous parks with tons of programming and places for people to relax. The Greenway had approached us about, hey, we've got this park parcel that's kind of underutilized right down by the Wharf District. Do you want to come take a look at it and tell us if you see any potential for an outdoor screening there? So I went with our friends from Boston Light and Sound, who are the best in the business when it comes to theatrical projection and equipment. Boston Light and Sound and I did a site visit. This is maybe 8 or 9 years ago at this point. And so we went down to the park and we're surveying and measuring. BLNS had the great idea that, listen, if we're going to do this, they offered to do it in 35 millimeter. They were like, we have this projection system that can be set up in the back of a box truck, and we'll do an inflatable screen, and we'll bring a surround system, and we'll sponsor it as long as you're willing to do it in 35 millimeter outdoors. And of course we said that sounds great, like, and having you guys provide this equipment. So they've been such a wonderful partner in putting that show on, and we must be getting close to 10 years of it. The first film we ever did down there, we were looking around, and we're looking around the site, and because it's down by the wharf and down by the aquarium, the field was absolutely full of seagulls, and there were seagulls swarming and flying over. Swarming is not the term for birds, I don't think, but you know what I mean. There were seagulls swooping and flying all around, and when the Greenway event manager said, "So what do you think the first film is going to be?" I was immediately like, "We're doing the birds." It has to be the birds. And Chapin Cutler, one of the co-owners of Boston Light and Sound, like just kind of nodded in approval and was like, "Yeah, that's what we're going to do." And so the very first screening we did was the birds. There were 600 people outdoors watching a 35 millimeter print projected in the middle of downtown Boston. And sure enough, because we had food trucks there, We had gulls kind of lingering overhead the whole night, and I was just like, wait for it. It's going to happen. And then in the middle of the screening, a seagull swooped down to grab a French fry from somebody, and all hell broke loose. And people were screaming and like laughing. And it was a pretty good bit. I felt like that was a good William Castle moment for me.
That you can't beat that kind of production value. I'm
Right?
sorry.
I mean, I shouldn't even say William Castle because Hitchcock would have been into such a thing as well. Yeah. So, and that opened up doors. So then shortly after doing that season of outdoor shows at the Greenway, I received a phone call from the trustees of reservations, who are a nonprofit organization here in Massachusetts who manage a lot of woodland properties and outdoor spaces and historical properties. And they called and again said, "Hey, we've got a location called the Rocky Woods Reservation. It's got kind of a campsite vibe to it. There's a cabin, there's a lake with canoes. Would you like to come and take a look and see what ideas pop into your head, for a potential outdoor screening here?" And when we went and visited that location, the cabin had like a small green area behind it that was kind of there. It's kind of there's like a rock wall that kind of makes like a bit of an amphitheater sort of vibe. And the cabin itself faces that rock wall. And up above the cabin, there was like an attic door that swings open. And I was like, oh my God, the place has its own projection booth. And so it was going to lend itself perfectly to like a pop-up digital outdoor show. And then again, when the question came up from that property manager of like, well, what sort of films do you picture doing here at this campsite location? Of course, the first thing I said was like, we're doing the Friday the 13th films on Friday the 13th here at this camp. And I'm going to hire a performer to play Jason Voorhees. And after a little bit of back and forth where they were like, oh God, we were thinking, like they were like, we were thinking more of a family friendly, like, Big Top Pee Wee or, other camping films with kids. And I was like, no, you're never going to get, for what this is going to cost to set up, you're not going to get people to pay for this. We need to get our After Midnight crowd out here. It needs to be Friday the 13th. And that's another show that we've done probably a dozen incarnations of. And we've branched out. We've also done the Evil Dead films because it is a cabin in the woods. We've done the Evil Dead films out there. We've done the Blair Witch Project out there. Even a great, more modern camp slasher comedy called The Final Girls we played out there to great success. And our most recent screening of two of the Friday the 13th films this past Friday the 13th, we sold out, quote unquote, our capacity for that space, which was about 500 people. So that's the Greenway and the trustees. Our other outdoor shows, you touched upon this. That got me doing those shows. And then next came, there's a beautiful place here in Boston called the Mount Auburn Cemetery. It is like one of these incredibly elaborate ancient cemeteries with incredible landscaping and beautiful chapels and cathedrals and other structures throughout the property. It's just a great place to come and hike and reflect on life and death. Doing those two outdoor programs kind of got me bold, and I sent them a out of the blue email trying to figure out if we could maybe do a screening of either Night of the Living Dead or Nosferatu at the Mount Auburn Cemetery, to which I received a very curt, deservedly curt reply that just said, Mr. Anastasio, we are an active burial site. You cannot be serious about playing something so ghoulish. But that being said, they were willing to meet and discuss, and they liked the idea of putting on a program that we now call Cemetery Cinema. Our first program in that series was a double feature. They did say you have to steer clear of anything ghoulish. We don't want anyone returning from the dead. We don't necessarily want horror films. But we will accept films, that are thoughtful about death and dying in the mourning process. So we did a double feature, and I said, well, what about personification of death? And they said, yeah, that would be fine. So we ended up doing a double feature of The Seventh Seal and Harold and Maude as our first show. And it worked wonderfully. And we had hundreds of people join us at the cemetery. And we've run 3 or 4 programs there since. And after a bit of a hiatus, we're going to be back there in September with a program that is still TBD. I'm really leaning toward returning with Seventh Seal and pairing it with Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. But I haven't told them that yet. But if they listen, that's the hot tip that I think that's the way I'd like to go. And then the final outdoor program that we've done is what you touched upon and we've vlogged about, which is I had approached the town of Medfield, who own a property known as Medfield State Hospital, which is an old 50 building asylum complex in Medfield, Massachusetts. It's in a remote area, rural area, kind of up on a hill. It was an active mental health facility from the late 1800s all the way through the early aughts. It served as the primary shooting location for Martin Scorsese's Shutter Island. And so I went and visited it and just thought it was the most amazing place. And after quite a few town meetings, they approved of the Coolidge putting on an outdoor screening of Shutter Island, which I had been picturing as a picnic style, park your car, walk up to the facility, put a blanket down and watch Shutter Island sort of event. But it was May 2020 when it was supposed to happen. So in the height of the lockdown of the pandemic. So we had to change our plans, and I didn't want to cancel because we had so many hundreds of tickets sold. I think it was like 500 plus tickets were sold for that event. So instead of doing the one screening and having people get out of their cars, we had the idea to just keep them parked in the field sort of set below the facility where you could still see the buildings, and people could arrive early. And we would just turn this into a drive-in. And so we redesigned what we were going to do. I spent many a sleepless night sort of designing the logistics of how we would park 200 cars and then have the cars exit after the show safely. And then we put up a 40-foot inflatable screen projected from the back of a box truck, and we just did a pirate radio station to broadcast the audio for the film without getting any sort of FAA clearance or FCC clearance. Those are the 4, and that show, wasn't just Shutter Island. It at first, the town council had said, this is all we're going to let you play here. Don't think that this is going to turn into any sort. But then we were so successful with Shutter Island that they said, okay, what else you got? And we started putting on all sorts of different programs and double features. A really great double feature that we did at that location was Night of the Living Dead and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre as examples of what I thought were two perfect drive-in horror movies.
But that's actually just incredible. There's people in LA that do outdoor and rooftop and that kind of stuff, but I don't feel like they lean into it in the correct way. They just oh, come watch a movie. And this comes back to, as I cut my own self off, it comes back to the experience. And I feel like these events are really successful is because the experience matters. It's not just the movie. And
the place matters. Yeah. You gotta tie your programming into the place.
Although if that cemetery ever reconsidered and let you do Night of the Living Dead or Cemetery Man or something like that, they would be printing fucking money. I guarantee it. And I know you know that too, but
no, totally. They're not so concerned with that, but
well, yeah. I mean, it is a cemetery, and every time someone dies and gets buried there, they get paid. So I guess it's a different scenario for them as opposed to a wooded area or a former hospital that's shut down.
I mean, even the hospital, like their some of their first comments were, we can't let you do anything. That they were worried about the sensitivity around what type of place it was. So they really didn't want to do a horror film. They rationalized playing Shutter Island because it was culturally significant to the town, even though that film specifically deals with mental health issues and is pretty scary. They kind of allowed it to go forward. But I wanted to make sure that whatever we were doing there, we were being respectful. Even when we were doing horror programs, we were contextualizing where we were. We had the groundskeeper give an overview at the start of each program of what the place was, and sort of to let people know that they should be respectful when they're walking the grounds and visiting.
You touched on this a little bit earlier about like, having, friends or being friends with other programmers, having connections, networking and stuff. Could you talk about how valuable that is and how you ended up going about it and like connecting with a lot of programmers? Because we have a lot of mutual friends across the country, and a lot of them you actually introduced me to too. So it's, just kind of talk about how the circle of friends in film programming kind of comes together.
Sure. I mean, for me, honestly, some of it for me started going to the 35. There's a place called the 35 millimeter film forum where some private collectors correspond with one another. In my early days, I was going to that forum a lot to ask questions about where to find certain prints and or track down rights for a particular film. And there was one person on that forum who was always helpful and quick to respond and give me the best information I'd ever received. And that person was Phil Blankenship. Phil was incredibly helpful to me and never asked anything in return because he's great and one of the best there is at what we do. He was helping me in like when I first started 2007, 2008. So that was how I met Phil. And then from there, there was a brief time where there was a annual conference happening called the Art House Convergence, where before Sundance every January, there was a conference of art house theater workers taking place in Midway, Utah. And I got to meet a few more folks at that convention. And that plugged me into the folks that I'm on a text thread to this day. Like I am on a group chat with some other art houses, places like the Music Box, the Texas Theater, the Hollywood Theater in Portland, Oregon. Dan Halstead is the programmer there, who is, in my mind, one of the, if not the best in the country, doing what we do. And the fact that, and I was aware of Dan, I think, well before he was aware of me. And the fact that that's a friend of mine now is truly a wonderful thing. It really helps to meet your peers and to be able to commiserate and realize that, the things that you're going through and trying to put on your shows and events, like everyone has similar troubles and frustrations, and just the experience that everyone else brings to the table. It cuts down on so much time if you have a group of people that you can cross-reference. I mean, you and I text directly and often, and I don't know. And I'm still meeting great programmers to this day. Like our friend Kay Lynch from Salem Horror Fest is someone who I've met in the last few years that I think is doing great work. And the other programmers that you've had on this show are really wonderful. And we're fortunate to be in the line of work that we're in. It's a privilege, and it's infinitely helpful to be able to just touch base with someone else that's doing it and ask a question, and give help where you can give it. So I mean, all of those experiences that I had early on with people helping me and answer my questions, I am always happy to answer questions from programmers from other parts of the country. It's I'm rambling now, but it's a very good thing. It's incredibly helpful, and I'm fortunate. It's one of the best parts of this job, the fact that I've gotten to meet my peers and now I get to call them friends.
there's a lot of great people, and like I think people don't understand like the reason why everyone like kind of pulls for each other and is like willing to help is because at a certain point in your programming career you're going to run into like, where the fuck do I find this film, or who has
Yeah,
rights to it, or just like even the most basic or just like normal question. It's like it's nice that like, because there's someone out there that has already gone on that journey, and
right.
you might have an answer for something that like they're looking for. So it's really helpful. Plus, my thing is like, the more cool people work together to do cool shit makes the world a better place overall.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, when I think back to those initial questions that I was asking on that film forum that Phil was answering, they were probably the silliest questions, you know. And so when I get stuff like that, I make sure that I answer it as, you know, as honestly and as directly as Phil did, without giving anybody any shit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important because, like, there's certain things that I have, like, just, I don't know why, like, certain studios and rights memorized, and, like, that can fire off the top of my head that, like, someone's asked me, where's this, to someone else would be a very easy thing to find. But,
Yeah,
but obviously, like, sometimes you're looking and you just don't see it, and, like, studios eat other studios, production companies move to other studios, and rights get really weird, but it's just like, it's always nice to help, and I think that's just the really important thing, just overall. And I am going to pivot, and I know this is your podcast, but I do think it's important because like, you're one of the people that was instrumental in helping January Giallo become this nationwide thing. And I guess I just want to talk about how, I guess I'm going to talk about me on your podcast. I'm sorry, Mark, but
this is your this, this
but
is your
like, well, it's my podcast, but
yeah.
you're the guest on the episode, but I'm hijacking
Oh
it.
no, please, I don't mind a little break.
But like, the thing is, and this is important, why networking is important, and like kind of how you build relationships. Because I did an episode on like how to be a film programmer like a couple of years ago, and I emphasized the importance of like, you're not just networking, you're building relationships. So I kind of want to expand upon it because you and Will Morris were the first two people that when I said, "Hey, I do this thing called January Giallo. Would you be interested in participating in your own venue?" And I kind of just want to ask, like, what made you feel comfortable to take a shot on that?
Oh, I was very aware of Cinematic Void uh, as a film series and as a brand. And I was always really into everything you were putting on. I feel like years before we corresponded directly, I was cheering on your shows, like just watching you on social media and things like that. So when we finally got to talking and made, you know, each other an acquaintance, and you had that idea, I was all for it. I had no hesitation. I thought it would be I thought it would be a great thing for our audience. I knew that our audience appreciates Giallo. I had run a few Giallo programs here, but to have someone, you know, who is as knowledgeable as you are travel out and share your programming experience and put films on screen, I thought it was a great idea. I had no hesitation.
Yeah, because the reason why I bring this up is because probably you and I have both been like cold pitched ideas for things to show and stuff like that.
Yeah,
And I guess the main point, and I'm using myself example because it's just easier this way, but
might as
like,
well.
yeah, it's just like, because we had talked beforehand and we helped each other out, vice versa. Like, hey, do you know the rights to this? Hey, do you know where this print is? That kind of stuff. It kind of opened the door that we build a relationship where, like, I was like, I don't know if you're going to say yes or no. And I also made it non committal. So if you said no, it's like, that's fine too. I just, and this is more for like programmers who are starting out. When you go to pitch something and you're pitching something cold, you got to make sure whatever you're pitching is going to be beneficial for both parties and not just one or the other.
Yeah, and know how to sell it. Know what the benefit is, you know, to that other party, and lean in heavily to that on your pitch.
And it also, and then down the line, it's opened the door where we actually just did a full on program exchange for a month. So I
Yeah,
do want,
that was really cool.
yeah. Originally, you were supposed to be on the podcast when we actually did this, which was we did a joint series in at my theater, we did Boston, Not LA, which was named after a very famous punk compilation, which you were like, is that too inside for people? And I was like, I don't care.
Yeah, no, it worked. It worked either way. People, no matter what, people got the gist.
Yeah, and then for you, I did Los Angeles, not LA, and I just want to talk about like how did we? I think it was you that like originally pitched the idea because after like doing I think it was the second year I'd done January Giallo at the Coolidge, I was like maybe we should do like if you want to pitch something or program something here because I feel like if you're willing to like show a bunch of weird Giallo films every January, I should extend the offer for you like hey maybe you can if you want to do like a guest programming spot here. I thought it was a cool idea. And I actually going to be doing a little bit more of that throughout the year and or just in general because I feel like it's cool to do cultural exchanges with people. Not necessarily the same way you and I did it, but
Yeah.
like just maybe just like, see how other people like other ideas from different places because then you're bringing in fresh programming and that kind of stuff.
No, yeah, I don't know if I think I did maybe I did pitch it to you. I was like, hey, how about I do a Boston movie out in Los Angeles? And that kind of turned into 4 Boston movies out there, some of which were successful, others not so much. But that was a fun exchange, and I gotta come up with something else that I
Yeah,
can throw your way, and I will. I'll pitch it as soon as I come up with it.
I do want to talk about and like because that was the first time you came for the last screening, which was Blown Away in town, and
Yes,
we did Halloween Horror Nights and we ruined her feet and that kind of stuff, and
that was very fun.
but you got the ultimate kind of LA screening experience while you're there because you had prepared something and then someone from the movie showed up. You want to talk about that?
Sure. I had prepared to kind of tear down some of the things I found sillier about Blown Away. I do love that movie. I think it's a total blast. Waka waka waka, and I was ready to do a bunch of bits about it that might not have been speaking too highly of toward the script. And then right about the time we were going to start introducing, the theater manager there at the Los Feliz let us know that the Blown Away screenwriter was there and that he had brought friends and family, and that he might have been interested in saying something before the show. So then no more could I poke fun at some of the holes in the story or some of the choices made in the Boston moments of the film. I didn't really feel comfortable doing that anymore. But we invited the man up for a Q and I forget his name. I'm being
I forget
terrible.
too, so don't feel bad. It's he's
Well,
on IMDb. You can figure it out from there.
yeah, blown away screenwriter, and he was down to just do an impromptu Q&A during the introduction, which was fun, and he mostly just wanted to put Tommy Lee Jones on blast and tell the whole crowd what a piece of shit he was to him and his parents when he was on set. He explained that it was the first Hollywood film that he had written, and he was on set that day with his mom and dad, and Tommy Lee Jones walked over and just basically called him an idiot in front of his father.
It's amazing. Is this is why you're nice to everyone in life because
Yeah,
like
you never know. It's going
because
to come back 30 years later. Someone's going to call you an asshole on stage at the Los Feliz.
and then that's all people need to know. It's like, wow, Tommy Lee Jones was a dick. Coming off that Oscar win for yeah, he was coming off The Fugitive, wasn't he? Because that was
Yeah,
during the like Tommy Lee Jones is like I'm gonna be weird in a lot of movies because it was like Blown Away. It was what's the third Batman movie? Is it
forever.
Forever? Thank you. I was just blanking there. Like
Yeah,
he was in his weird bag and like apparently was slightly difficult during that period with certain people.
sure.
But but that's the LA experience. Like the amount of times where like I've prepared something and all of a sudden it's like, hey, someone from the film series, like shit, now I got to do a Q&A that I'm not prepared for. Or
That would drive me nuts. I'm glad. I mean, I would love to be able to have the amount of guests that you have, but we definitely do not have that issue here in Boston.
I I
We have
mean
to Barely
Yeah.
bribe people to come to New England for screenings.
I mean, the worst one, I don't even know if it's the worst one, but the writer to Live and Die in LA was there, and we were doing a bit where we were going to recreate the car chase sequence and have people pull stunts and get out of the way, and whoever did the best stunt won a prize. So, like, the guy who wrote To Live and Die in LA, the book and the screenplay was in the crowd. And normally I would have just aborted the whole thing, but Deanna Rooney, who is in Mystery Science Theater and a bunch of other things, we sometimes do bits. She was dressed as Willem Dafoe, but not from The Live and Die in LA, but from The Lighthouse, and she was hiding in a trash can on stage that was already up there. And I had one of the programmers of the American Cinematheque named Chris Lemire looks like William L. Peterson circa To Live and Die in LA and Manhunter, like dead ringer. So this is the second time I've subjected Chris to this shit. We made him jump through a fake glass window for Manhunter in slow motion, where I made the crowd like do Inagata the Vita while he was doing it. So Chris already knew he was in for it. And I was like, do we just abort this bit? Because it's like, how's the screenwriter going to react to this like shit show of a bit? But it's like, no, we just went ahead and did it. He didn't say anything afterwards. I didn't even meet him that night, and it's probably for the best. Like, hey, nice to meet you. Sorry, we just made a joke of like this movie.
That's funny.
But yeah, that shit happens all the time. Sometimes it's cool, but sometimes it's like, man, I'm not gonna do this. And people are like, oh, that's first world, that's LA, screening problems, and like I get that, but like,
Yeah, he was the Blown Away screenwriter was nice. It was just mostly like I had, because it wasn't my house, right? So
yeah,
I was trying to come prepared, and
mm-hmm.
then I had to throw it out the window and then wing it while nervous. So I was like, man, I wasn't at my best, but I'll try to redeem myself on my next. And that was my first time in Los Angeles too. So
Yeah, we did Halloween filming location and Elm Street filming locations, and
it was awesome.
yeah, you went to a poolside screening of Van Nuys Boulevard.
I thought that was a perfect first thing to do upon getting to LA.
Yeah, that I mean, I hope you, whenever you come up with your next series, I hope you come back for one of them so we can do the exchange again.
Yeah, and I'll try to stay for a little longer. I think, what did I do? Like 2 nights, three nights.
Yeah, I think you flew. What did you fly in on like a Friday, and then you flew out on a
Oh,
Tuesday? I
okay,
can't.
that's not bad.
Yeah, you were there for a weekend, so you got a lot in. So since we're getting towards the end here, I'm just gonna throw some questions to you
Sure.
that are kind of things that film programmers cross at different times. Do you have a favorite event you've ever hosted?
Oh boy.
It can be more than one if it gets too difficult.
Uh. Oh geez. Oh geez. Uh. There's so many. I truly love what I do, and there are many that I enjoy. I think one of the events that I'm most proud of for putting on is when we had Fabio Frizzi here for the first tour that he and his band Frizzi Toffolci did their live score to the Beyond. Um, we've had Fabio here 3 times, but the first time that we did it, it was kind of a big deal. I mean, I mean, they were all a big deal, but that was putting on a show for someone that I truly admired and was such a huge fan of. And Fabio and everybody in his band are such wonderful people, and it was just the best experience of uh, producing an amazing live concert. And we had such a great, nearly sold out house here as part of that tour. I had served as sort of their American sponsor to get them over for Italy. So there was lots of work to be done in the lead up to that show. And it ended up just being such an amazing night. And that's one that I think of often as a highlight in my career. I think, one of the favorite Q&As that I've ever done was when we gave Michael Douglas our Coolidge Award, our major annual award. I moderated the afternoon conversation following a screening of Wonder Boys, And the reason why that one was so important to me was my parents are such a huge fan of Michael Douglas, and they were able to make it up for the show. And I think prior to that, they thought that, like, working at a movie theater, quote unquote, meant that I was doing the stuff that I was doing when I first started here, like selling tickets and serving popcorn. And that, in their mind, that was still my job. But then they got to come up for a very fancy production where we had like a stage set for the conversation, and I got to moderate this Q&A with Mr. Douglas. And then before the award was given later that evening, I was backstage with him, and he was like, "Hey, I heard your folks are here." I was like, "Yeah, they're fans." And he's like, "You want to go get them?" And I ran out to the audience real quick, and I brought my parents backstage, and they had a nice few minutes with someone who they truly loved. And I thought that he was a real gentleman for doing that for my mom and dad. And he even threw in like, your son this afternoon, like, that was one of the best Q&As I've ever been a part of. You should be proud of him. Which he was totally bullshitting because I was so fucking nervous. I barely got my questions out, but it was nice of him to say so. So that's one of my favorite produced events, and a favorite Q&A that I've done.
Kind of talking about Q&As. I know, like, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's more difficult, but like if you do Q&As, it's very specific with people that obviously live out there, but you've had the opportunity to bring people out and do Q&As and stuff.
Yeah.
When you do Q&As and events, like, it's kind of weird because, like, interviewer is not necessarily a component of film programming, but because, like, we host and we program. Could you talk about, like, how, did you always want to do like Q&As and be the interviewer, or was it just something you got thrown into by default because you were the guy working?
I Good question. Default, I think that it is an expected part of the job here. Um, I think that I'm much better as a host, a show host. I do a great 5 to 10 minutes before the show to get people psyched and to make them feel welcome. So I'm way better at introducing films than I am at moderating conversations, because I do that portion less frequently. So I have had some significant crashes and burns here during Q&As. There are some that I wish I could get back, where I've had guests where, like, the entirety of the weekend that they spent here was a wonderful experience, and then I'm with them all weekend, and then when it comes down to the fucking note card and sitting with them on stage, and I totally flub it.
Now,
Um,
I was gonna
I'm
say, do you
Yeah,
think you're being super critical on yourself?
probably. Yeah, they're probably a lot, and a lot of them are on tape, and I've never gone back to look at them. I just have a sense that I, kind of failed miserably. I do a lot of prep. I have a very conversational style when it comes to my Q&A moderation. So sometimes it seems to people as though I might not be as prepared as I am, but it's mostly because I'm more inclined to follow the conversation in the moment where it's going, rather than I am sort of ignoring what the person is saying and going back to my note card. Um, and that sometimes that works wonderfully, and sometimes it fails, and people really want you to get back to just asking the questions.
I mean, I personally think if you're beholden to your questions that you wrote, you're doing a disservice to the Q&A. And that's me personally. And like, and I write questions and I prepare and stuff, but like, I think one of the key components, and this is also for film programmers who might be doing Q&As, and you may or may not agree with this. I feel like the most important thing you can do in a Q&A as a moderator is listen.
Yes. Yeah, I try to listen. I try to throw to the crowd when I see that they have questions, because that sometimes can break it up, and funny, spontaneous things can happen, and also horrible things can happen when you go to an audience that you never know. I mean, one Q&A that I wish I could get back was when we gave Adrienne Barbeau our Coolidge After Midnight award. I've never gone back to look at the tape, but that's a Q&A where I feel like I just kind of sat there like Chris Farley interviewing Paul McCartney in that SNL sketch where he's like, remember that? Wasn't that awesome? Is kind of how what I felt like I was doing in that Q&A, even though like Adrienne is lovely and we had such a great weekend together, doing events and uh, visiting local schools, even performing arts schools she was visiting. And I felt like I could have been better there. Keir Delay is one. I did a Q&A with Keir Delay following a screening of 2001 A Space Odyssey, where I kind of deviated from the script and threw him off, and it was totally my fault. But in the middle of our conversation, I tried to explain to him how we had had dinner together before the Q&A, and that I was really getting a kick out of how often he was talking to his iPhone and asking Siri questions, for a
Yeah.
movie like 2001, where he's facing off against AI, to
Yeah.
see Kieran utilizing AI in his day-to-day life so frequently. I tried to bring that up as part of the conversation, and he could not understand what I was trying to say, and it got kind of awkward, and I had to just like, and back to the note card. But that was my fault for not sticking to the script with a guest that really had wanted me to stick to the script.
I think it's a balance. And like, I've dealt with people. I've also, there's many ways you do it. You can ask a simple question and get a long, elegant, and
Yes.
perfect answer out of it. There's Q&As where I usually rate about the same amount of questions for each Q&A regardless of what it is. And there's times where like I will burn through every question and it's like 15 minutes because it's just how the questions are answered.
Right.
And those are the only ones I really open the audience questions. I usually avoid audience questions because, well, LA is the town of, hey, I'm an aspiring screenwriter or actor. I used to be really hard on myself if I like fluffed a question or asked something that didn't like kind of land or like didn't do what I thought to do. Now I just kind of roll with it. Like I just did that Hollywood 90028 Q&A and just had a blast with it, and I was fucking up the whole time. I couldn't remember fucking what zip code like the theater was under. I just had like a brain fart and started like saying my zip code where I was in LA, and they're like, no, the crowd's like, no, it's 90027 here, not 38. I'm like, never mind, I'm tired. And the guy's like, Jesus Christ. The Christopher, who's the star of the movie, is like, man, I'm older than you. What the hell's going on? I was like, I don't know, man. It's been a long fucking day. Anyway.
Sometimes that shit happens.
I mean, there's been Q&As where I've gotten railroaded by difficult guests, and like, but that's just the nature of it. But I do think it's like, the safest thing you can do as a film programmer that has to do Q&As from time to time is just listen and just kind of go with the flow, and you have your questions in your pocket, and if you're really bombing, you can always throw it to the audience.
Exactly. When I get too flustered, I kick it to the audience for questions.
And because you probably see that crowd enough, you know which people not to pick.
Oh, I definitely know the people to avoid. We've been talking about a notorious Q&A here with director Jonathan Glazer, who has Zone of Interest in theaters now. Jonathan was here for oh gosh, what is the alien movie that he did? Under the Skin.
The Skin, yeah. I already see where this is going, but continue.
Well, he was here for an early screening of Under the Skin where we had an audience. The first question that he got here in Boston was, why did you adapt this story from such and such author and not one of his better stories? And he just, that was question one. And he immediately like went to his pinching his nose like, oh God, what are we getting into here? The second question was, I think the film was presented in the wrong aspect ratio.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Which was just not the case. And our projectionist was yelling down from the booth, like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And then even the third question was tough. Like, I found this to be misogynistic, like,
oh God.
And so I walked down the stairs with him afterwards, like, hey man, I'm sorry about all that. And he was like, is this the way it always is? I was like, I don't know, man. I thought the film was great. and he actually we have visiting filmmakers sign our projection booth door, just as a what do you call it, a custom here.
Yeah.
And Jonathan Glazer signed the door. Tough crowd.
I don't know if you already hinted at this, but usually when I ask for like, what's your highlight of your film program career, I always kind of want to ask, and you don't have to answer it if it's like too painful or you can't talk about it because of circumstance. Like, what's the screening that absolutely went to shit? Be it a technical problem or like just
Oh, I'll give you, yeah, you want gone to shit. I'll give you the worst that can happen. So at one of those Medfield State Hospital drive-in events, we were doing a double feature of The Thing and They Live. And because, as I mentioned, that hospital system is up on a hill, they built it up there so that there would always be a constant breeze to help people heal. But that is not conducive to outdoor inflatable screens. So there was a storm one night that blew in after we had gotten all 200 cars parked. I had introduced the film. We were going to try to get it off. We knew that there was going to be a problem. And or there was potential for problem. Actually, I'm not telling the story right. So it had been windy the day before as well, and our 40-foot inflatable screen was absolutely torn to ribbons by the wind in the previous day. And we brought the screen to like a person who repairs ship sails. And so the vinyl, like an emergency fix was made where someone who usually fixes the sail of ships sewed the vinyl back together, and then we put layers of other vinyl on top of that and heated it up and sealed it, and then we got the screen inflated again just in time for the show, parked 200 cars, and then sure enough, 10 minutes into the movie, the wind started kicking up again. I'm watching it happen, like I can still see it happening. So now we're at the scene in The Thing where the Thing has infiltrated the pen of dogs, and it's like eating the dogs, and they're all morphing into one globulous creature, and it's horrifying. And as that scene was happening, the screen was kind of taken into the air, and it blew a hole in the top of it and started losing all of the air. And so this 40-foot screen, while people are screaming and the dogs are dying, it's kind of flapping in the wind and folding over on itself. And prior to that, one of our techs had tried to grab a hold of the rope and hold it down. And I watched as I was running toward the screen to yell for them not to do this. I was sprinting toward the screen and literally saw a projectionist sort of fly through the air while holding a rope in front of the image. And he was honestly, like, feet were honestly 8 feet above the ground. And I'm screaming like, stop, just let it go. Like, it's over. We're done. And so the screen crumpled to the ground in front of everybody, sort of honking. And I then had to get on a microphone in front of all of these car headlights and just say, like, that's all there is for tonight, everybody. Like, we lost our battle with the elements, and we will be automatically issuing refunds to anyone who cannot make it, to the rescheduled show. We'll try to reschedule if you already want a refund. And so and then I had to stand there for another 30 minutes while we escorted, every car off the field. And that's about as worse as I've seen it. Literally falling to pieces in front of me.
Yeah, that's pretty epic in many different ways. It sounds visually like, just having the visuals in my head, it's like, wow, that had to have been incredible. But like also knowing, like, being there, like, that fucking sucks, because that's a lot of work that just
So
literally
much work.
it just became dust in the wind.
Truly. And like for a while, people were hanging with it because it took like probably, it took a few minutes for the screen to fully deflate. And for the longest time, and there was a few cars left on the lot. And as I went over to their windows just to be like, yeah, we're not gonna be able to get it back. They're like, I know, we're just sitting here because we thought that was fucking cool. It was like, did you plan? Yeah, it was the pandemic. So like
Yeah.
this was pandemic time. So like people were kind of starved for entertainment, and it was a lot of hard work. But that was part of the motivation. Was like, our theater is closed. Let's do what we can to give the people a show outdoors. And that was one instance of it going all to hell.
Do you have a white whale film that you've always wanted to screen, but for whatever reason you haven't found any materials, be it a print or, some things don't even have DCPs or just anything that's playable? Is there a film that you've been chasing your programming career that you have yet to be able to screen that still want to?
I don't think I have one anymore. In the past, some white whale films have been Tom Waits's Big Time.
Mm-hmm.
It's one that eluded me for a while, but I now have a print source for that, and maybe everyone else always did. But it took me a while to figure out who had it. Prior to that, it was Point Break. This was years and years and years ago. I now own a print of Point Break, probably because of how difficult that early search for it was. But no, I actually, I don't really have one right now that I haven't been able to play. I feel like eventually everything I've tried to track down, I've been able to. Dawn of the Dead in 35 millimeter is a screening I would love to be able to do someday. I know that there are all sorts of difficulties around that. But someday I'll run a print of that film.
For my last question, where do you see yourself in your career as a film programmer moving forward into the future? Is there other things you want to do? Is there others like screening ideas? How do you see yourself growing and evolving in this weird field that we participate in?
I still have ideas. I've got lots of things I want to try. More weird location stuff. More other signature programs that I'd like to begin here at the Coolidge. Our new expanded theater space, I think, really does or really will put us on the map as like a regional film institution in a way that we weren't before, with all of our educational initiatives. I think we're going to be able to do a better job of drawing filmmakers and talent here to the theater to participate in screenings and Q&As and things. So I'll be able to brush up on my skills as an interviewer, I hope. Yeah, I just hope that we are able to not only continue doing what we do now so well, but I see us growing in a lot of ways, and I'm really excited for all that stuff to start. The ceiling here for everyone has increased with the expansion of the theater, and we're going to get bigger and better in so many different ways, and that's mostly what I'm looking forward to. I don't really know concretely what that looks like for me, other than being a lot busier and hopefully having a couple other people working in programming here at the theater specifically.
Mark, I want to thank you for your time today. Where can people find you or Coolidge After Midnite or the Coolidge online?
Online, for the Coolidge, it's at the Coolidge on all platforms, and coolidge.org is our website. For the After Midnite program, you can find us at Coolidge Midnite on Instagram and Twitter, I believe, and it's Coolidge After Midnite on Facebook. And if anybody's interested in following me, I'm just at Midnite Mark.
Mark, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk shop with you and just talk life, film, things getting destroyed for no reason other than acts of God. But yeah, it's always a pleasure, man.
No, this was great. It's an honor to be on the show.
All right. Thank you, Mark. And until next time, see you in the void.